The security guard wouldn't even let me back into the building. After 12 years of arriving through the same front entrance every Monday morning, I suddenly found myself standing on the sidewalk holding a cardboard box with my family photos, a coffee mug my daughter had painted in kindergarten, and a termination letter that didn't even make sense. Behind the glass doors, people I had worked beside for more than a decade avoided making eye contact. Some pretended to answer emails. Others stared at their computer screens. Nobody wanted to be seen looking at the man who had just been fired. I looked down at my phone. The screen showed one unread message from my 9-year-old daughter. "Good luck at work today, Dad. Love you." She had no idea that I no longer had a job. She had no idea that the health insurance covering her asthma medication had just disappeared. She had no idea that the promotion I'd spent 2 years working toward had turned into unemployment before lunchtime. What nobody inside that building knew was this: they hadn't fired an ordinary employee. They had fired the one person standing between them and losing their biggest client. And one phone call later, the people celebrating my termination would be packing up their own desks. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 42 years old and the father of the smartest little girl I've ever known. 6 years earlier, my wife passed away after a sudden illness. From that day forward, everything in my life revolved around one goal: give my daughter Emma the stable childhood she deserved. That wasn't always easy. Single parenting meant early mornings, late nights, homework at the kitchen table, soccer practice after work, doctor appointments, school concerts, science fairs, laundry at midnight, coffee before sunrise. I wouldn't have traded any of it. My job made all of that possible. I worked as Senior Client Operations Manager for Horizon Business Solutions. When I first joined the company, it had fewer than 50 employees. By the time this story began, we had grown to nearly 400. I had helped build many of the systems the company still relied on every day: training programs, client onboarding, emergency response procedures, vendor relationships. Some of our largest customers dealt directly with me, not because my title demanded it, because they trusted me. One client in particular mattered more than all the others combined: Atlas Medical Network. Their account generated almost 30% of the company's annual revenue. For nearly 8 years, I personally managed every major contract renewal, every service upgrade, every emergency request. I knew their executives by name. They knew mine. That relationship wasn't built overnight. It was built through years of answering late-night phone calls, solving problems before they became disasters, and treating their business as if it were my own. Then everything changed when Horizon hired a new chief operating officer. His name was Victor Reynolds. Victor believed every department needed to become leaner. That was his favorite word: lean. To him, experienced employees weren't valuable. They were expensive. Within 6 months, longtime managers started disappearing. Some accepted early retirement. Others resigned after repeated conflicts. Those who remained learned an important lesson: keep your head down, don't question Victor, or start updating your resume. At first, Victor ignored me. My department consistently exceeded performance goals. Client satisfaction remained among the highest in the company. Revenue kept growing. There wasn't much he could criticize, so he focused on something else: salary. During one executive meeting, I overheard him joking with another vice president. "Imagine how much payroll we'd save if we replaced all these senior managers with younger talent." The comment stayed with me. Not because it offended me, because it revealed exactly how he viewed people: as numbers on a spreadsheet. A month later, he scheduled a meeting with me. "I've reviewed your department." "Great. I think you're doing too much personally. I stay involved because our clients expect consistency. They'll adapt. They trust relationships. They trust the company." I smiled politely. Those aren't always the same thing. He didn't like that answer. Over the next several weeks, he reassigned portions of my responsibilities. Client meetings I'd handled for years suddenly went to less experienced managers. Several key accounts were transferred without explanation. Even Atlas Medical received a new account supervisor. a young manager named Kyle. Kyle was enthusiastic, hardworking, and completely overwhelmed. I tried helping him, shared documentation, introduced him to client contacts, explained potential issues before they happened. He appreciated it. Victor didn't. You need to stop interfering. I'm training him. He'll learn. I'd rather he learn before making expensive mistakes. Victor leaned back. Daniel. Yes? You're making yourself difficult to replace. I looked directly at him. I thought replacing me wasn't the goal. He smiled. It isn't. But his eyes told a different story. 2 weeks later, I received an email from Human Resources. Mandatory performance review. Odd. My annual evaluation wasn't due for another 5 months. The meeting lasted less than 15 minutes. Victor attended. So did HR. A prepared document sat on the table. The decision had clearly been made before I walked in. Daniel. Victor folded his hands. We're restructuring leadership. I'm being demoted? No. We're eliminating your position. I stared at him. My position? Effective immediately. What about my department? It'll be absorbed by other managers. I looked toward HR. Neither person met my eyes. What performance issue justified this? Victor answered calmly. This isn't performance-related. So why me? We're moving in a different direction. There it was. The sentence every employee dreads. Vague, meaningless, impossible to argue with. The HR representative slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a severance agreement, 2 weeks of pay, a confidentiality clause, a deadline to sign. I closed the folder. I'm not signing this today. That's your choice. It is. 20 minutes later, I was standing outside holding my cardboard box. As I walked toward my truck, my phone rang. The caller ID made me stop. Michael Harrison, Chief Executive Officer, Atlas Medical Network, one of our largest clients, I answered. Michael, I just heard. News travels fast. It does. There was a brief silence. Then he asked one question that changed everything. Daniel, did you quit? No. Were you fired? Yes. Another long pause. Finally, he spoke again. I need you to answer one more question. I'm listening. Who exactly is managing our account now? I looked back at Horizon's headquarters, then quietly replied, I honestly don't know. The silence on the other end lasted nearly 10 seconds. When Michael spoke again, his voice had completely changed. Don't hang up. I'm calling someone else. Within the next 15 minutes, 3 executives would receive phone calls they never expected, and by the end of the day, the company that had fired me would realize they hadn't just eliminated a salary, they had just endangered the most valuable client they had. I stayed on the phone with Michael Harrison while sitting in my truck across the street from Horizon's headquarters. Through the windshield, I watched employees walking in and out of the building, completely unaware that one phone call was about to change their entire afternoon. Michael finally came back on the line. I just spoke with your company's CEO. What did he say? He sounded surprised. I imagine he did. I asked him a very simple question. What was that? Who approved firing the only person my executive team trusted with our account? I leaned back in my seat. And? He didn't have an answer. That wasn't unusual. Victor Reynolds made most operational decisions without consulting many people above him. Apparently, this was one of them. Michael continued. I've also scheduled an emergency meeting with our board. Michael, you don't owe Horizon anything anymore. I know. But I owe you honesty. He paused. If they don't fix this today, we're reviewing every contract we have with them. That sentence alone represented nearly $80 million in annual business. Inside Horizon's headquarters, nobody knew that clock had already started. About 40 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time, it was Sarah Mitchell, Horizon's Chief Executive Officer. Unlike Victor, Sarah had always treated people with respect. She traveled frequently, leaving daily operations to her executive team. Unfortunately, that meant she hadn't been present when Victor decided to eliminate my position. Daniel. Good afternoon. I just learned what happened. I assumed you would. I'm very sorry. I appreciate that. Can you come back to the office? I'm no longer an employee. I know, but I need to understand what happened. After thinking for a moment, I agreed. Not because I wanted my job back, because I wanted answers too. When I returned an hour later, the atmosphere had completely changed. The same receptionist who had quietly watched me leave now stood up immediately. Several employees looked relieved to see me. Others looked confused. One whispered, "I thought he was fired." So did I. Sarah met me in the executive conference room. Victor was already there. So were human resources, the chief financial officer, and the company's legal counsel. Nobody smiled. Sarah placed a folder on the table. "I've reviewed your personnel file." "So have I. I can't find a documented performance issue." "There isn't one." She turned toward Victor. "Can you explain the business justification?" Victor remained calm. "We're restructuring." Sarah nodded. "I understand restructuring." She opened another document. "What I don't understand is eliminating the senior manager responsible for our largest client without a transition plan." Victor folded his arms. "Kyle can handle Atlas." Sarah looked toward me. "Can he?" I answered honestly. "Eventually. But not today." Victor interrupted. "He needs experience." Sarah looked back at him. "And removing the person responsible for training him gives him that experience?" No one spoke. At that exact moment, the conference room phone rang. Sarah pressed the speaker button. "This is Sarah," a nervous voice answered. "Atlas Medical is on line 1. Sarah glanced around the room. "Put them through." Michael Harrison's voice filled the room. "Good afternoon, everyone," Sarah answered. "Michael. I'll keep this brief. We're listening. Our board has completed an emergency review." The room became completely silent. Michael continued. "We have temporarily suspended all upcoming expansion projects with Horizon." The chief financial officer immediately reached for a calculator. Those projects alone represented millions in future revenue. Michael wasn't finished. "We're also initiating a 30-day review of our entire service agreement." Sarah remained composed. "I understand. We're not making accusations. We simply need confidence that our business is being managed properly." Victor finally spoke. "Michael, Kyle is fully capable." Michael answered politely. "I've spoken with Kyle." Everyone looked surprised. He admitted he's never handled a healthcare network of our size. Victor didn't respond. Michael continued. "He also told me Daniel created most of the operational systems your company still uses." Another long silence followed. Then Michael asked the question no executive wanted to hear. "Why exactly was Daniel terminated?" Nobody answered, because nobody in the room had a good answer. Michael spoke again. "I'll expect a written explanation by tomorrow morning." Then the line disconnected. The conference room remained silent. The CFO looked at Sarah. "If Atlas leaves?" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Everyone understood. Losing Atlas wouldn't just reduce profits. It would trigger layoffs. Expansion plans would stop. Investor confidence would suffer. The company's reputation would take a major hit. Sarah slowly turned toward Victor. "Did you discuss this decision with anyone?" "No." "Did you evaluate client impact?" "No." "Did you consult legal?" "No." "Human resources?" "No." "The board?" "No." Each answer made the room heavier. Sarah stood and walked to the window overlooking the parking lot. Finally, she turned back. "I've spent 10 years building this company." She looked directly at Victor. "I won't let one reckless decision destroy it." Victor remained confident. "We can recover." Sarah nodded. "I hope you're right." Then she looked at legal. I want a complete review of every staffing decision made during the last 6 months. The attorney nodded. It'll begin immediately. The meeting ended shortly afterward. I gathered my box and prepared to leave. Sarah stopped me at the door. Daniel. Yes? If circumstances changed, I smiled politely. I appreciate it. But right now, my priority is Emma. She nodded. I understand. That evening, I picked Emma up from soccer practice. She climbed into the truck carrying her backpack. How was work? Children ask simple questions. Sometimes they're the hardest to answer. I smiled. It was different today. She looked at me carefully. Everything okay? I reached over and squeezed her hand. It will be. She smiled. I knew it. That little bit of confidence meant more than any job title. Meanwhile, inside Horizon's headquarters, the legal review had already begun. Email records, personnel decisions, executive approvals, performance evaluations, expense reports. Everything Victor had touched over the previous 6 months was being examined. What started as an effort to understand my termination quickly uncovered something much bigger. Several experienced employees had been dismissed without proper documentation. Client complaints had been quietly closed without executive review. Training budgets had been cut despite repeated warnings. Critical procedures had been bypassed to reduce costs. None of those decisions looked significant by themselves. Together, they painted a troubling picture. 3 days later, Horizon's board of directors scheduled an emergency meeting. For the first time since joining the company, Victor was required to explain every major decision he had made. He arrived carrying charts about payroll savings. He left realizing the board wasn't interested in savings anymore. They wanted accountability. And when the internal investigation report was finally presented, the executives who had approved or ignored those decisions would soon discover that my termination had been only the beginning of the story. The emergency board meeting began at exactly 9 o'clock Monday morning. Every director was present. The company's outside legal counsel attended. So did the independent human resources consultant hired to review the recent executive decisions. Victor Reynolds entered carrying a thick binder filled with charts. He looked confident. He believed the meeting would focus on cost savings. Instead, it focused on consequences. Sarah Mitchell stood first. Ladies and gentlemen, before we discuss financial performance, we need to address a series of management decisions that have placed this company at significant operational risk. The lights dimmed. A presentation appeared on the large screen. The first slide read, Leadership Review, Operational Risk Assessment. The second slide showed employee turnover. In only 6 months, 17 experienced managers had left the company. 8 had been terminated. 9 had resigned. Several departments were operating with less than half their previous experience. Victor cleared his throat. Replacing expensive management was part of our efficiency strategy. No one responded. The next slide appeared. Client satisfaction. For years, Horizon averaged outstanding ratings. Over the previous 4 months, satisfaction scores had steadily declined. Not dramatically, just enough to raise concerns. Then came the third slide, critical client complaints. Several had been closed without executive review. Others remained unresolved for weeks. The directors exchanged uneasy looks. One board member leaned forward. When were we informed of this? Sarah answered honestly. We weren't. The room became very quiet. Then the independent HR consultant stood. She carried 3 binders. I reviewed every executive termination completed during the past 6 months. She opened the first binder. In 12 cases, I found no documented performance deficiencies. She opened the second. In 7 cases, required approval procedures were bypassed. Then the third. And in multiple instances, employees responsible for key client relationships were removed without transition planning. Every page pointed toward the same executive, Victor Reynolds. He shifted in his chair. I was trying to modernize operations. A board member asked calmly, Did anyone tell you to eliminate experienced leadership? No. Did anyone authorize bypassing policy? No. Did anyone recommend dismissing the manager responsible for our largest customer? Victor remained silent. The answer was obvious. Then Sarah played the recording from Atlas Medical's conference call. The room listened as Michael Harrison explained why his company had suspended future expansion work. When the recording ended, the chief financial officer stood. If Atlas cancels their contract, he clicked another slide. Our projected revenue drops by nearly 30%. Another slide followed. Expansion projects, hiring plans, investment schedules. Every forecast turned red. One director quietly asked, "All because one experienced employee was terminated?" Sarah answered, "No." She looked toward Victor, "Because someone failed to understand the value of relationships." The meeting recessed for lunch. Victor remained alone in the conference room. When everyone returned, the atmosphere had changed. The board had already reached its decision. The chairman stood. After reviewing the investigation, the board has determined that the operational decisions made under Mr. Reynolds' leadership exposed Horizon Business Solutions to unacceptable financial and reputational risk. He paused. Effective immediately, Victor Reynolds is relieved of his duties as Chief Operating Officer. No applause, no celebration, only silence. Security staff quietly escorted Victor to collect his belongings. Several executives watched through the glass walls. Some looked shocked, others looked relieved, but the board wasn't finished. The HR consultant recommended restoring several management positions and reviewing past termination decisions. Former employees began receiving phone calls. Some accepted invitations to return. Others had already moved on. Late that afternoon, Sarah called me. "Daniel, would you be willing to meet tomorrow?" "I can." The next morning, I walked into the same building where I'd carried out a cardboard box only days earlier. This time, the atmosphere felt completely different. Sarah greeted me personally. "Thank you for coming." She placed a folder on the table. "We'd like you to return." I looked at the offer. The position wasn't my old job. It was a newly created role, Vice President of Client Success. The responsibilities were broader. The salary was higher. The authority to improve training, client relationships, and leadership development was built into the role. Sarah smiled. "This position didn't exist before. I can see that. We created it because we realized something." "What's that?" "Systems matter." She paused. "But the people who build trust matter even more." I appreciated the offer. It was generous. But I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I asked one question. "If I come back?" Sarah nodded. "I'm listening." "I want leadership training for every new manager." "Done." "I want client transition plans before any staffing changes." "Done." "I want mentorship programs so experience isn't treated like a cost." Sarah smiled. "Done." "And one more thing." "What?" "No employee should ever walk out of this building wondering why they were fired." She extended her hand. "You have my word." After discussing everything with Emma that evening, I accepted. When I started my new position, my first meeting wasn't with executives. It was with frontline employees. I told them something I'd learned the hard way. A company's greatest asset isn't its software. It isn't its office. It isn't its quarterly report. It's the trust people build every single day. Over the next year, Horizon slowly rebuilt its reputation. Atlas Medical renewed its agreement after seeing meaningful changes. Client satisfaction climbed. Employee turnover dropped dramatically. Training programs returned. Experienced managers were encouraged to mentor newer employees instead of competing with them. One Friday afternoon, Emma visited the office after school. She walked into my new office carrying the same coffee mug she'd painted years earlier. "You kept it." "Of course." She looked around. "This office is bigger." I laughed. "It is." "Does that mean you got promoted?" "I guess it does." She smiled proudly. "I knew everything would be okay." I smiled back. So did I. Sometimes the worst day of your career becomes the beginning of something better. Not because someone rescues you, but because integrity has a way of revealing itself over time. A title can be taken away, a paycheck can stop, an office can disappear overnight, but trust is earned one conversation at a time. And once people know they can depend on you, that becomes something no termination letter can ever erase. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful workplace stories, emotional family journeys, justice-served stories, and unforgettable endings every week. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next story. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.